Hi guys, I hope you're well. So today I decided I wanted to talk a little bit more about the divine and deities and what I believe and how I interact with them and that kind of thing. So I think although the term paganism generally implies some form of polytheism, I don't consider myself to be a polytheist at all. With that being said, I do sort of honour or interact with deities, but perhaps not in the way that any polytheists would. I consider them to be archetypes, and that's something that gets said quite a lot within the pagan community, and even by some people who do describe themselves as polytheists. But I definitely don't see deities, individual deities, as being personal figures of themselves that are separate to myself. And I certainly don't see them as being sort of individual divine figures. As I've said before, I consider myself to be a pantheist. And although I've mostly shrugged off the term atheist at this point, it still is probably to some extent relevant for me. I wrote a blog post a while ago on my pantheism when I was still sort of getting to grips with what it meant to me, called emotional pantheism. And in it I sort of realised that while I am an emotional pantheist, I am very much a logical atheist, in that when I think about the divine and the world in a logical fashion, I am to a large extent an atheist, in that I don't believe in a personal God. I don't really believe in any sort of gods that can be interacted with or that are omnipotent, omnipresent really in any way, and that are sort of conscious in the way that we understand consciousness and that are watching over us. All of that kind of idea of the divine, of deity, really isn't relevant to me at all. So in that way you could say that I'm an atheist. However, the way I feel about the cosmos makes me call myself a pantheist, as I've said before. So I consider myself to be a sort of emotional pantheist. It's a bit more complex than that though. It's not really as simple as saying, oh, I'm an atheist when it comes to talking about gods and goddesses, and I'm a pantheist because when I look at the night sky I feel a sense of awe and I feel like the world around me is divine, and the very fact of my existence is in some way divine. It's definitely not as simple as that, because my embracing of the term paganism, it's definitely not just because I follow the wheel of the year or because my ritual structure is largely based on a sort of neo-pagan structure. I also very much do embrace various deities into my practice and into my way of seeing the divine. And I think in this way I'm probably quite similar to a lot of pagan pantheists. An awful lot of pagans, they do incorporate deities into their practice to one extent or another, but they are in fact pantheists, in that they believe that all these deities are really only a manifestation of one sort of divine, not even a divine being, but a divine presence, a divine source, or a divine energy, or something like that. I think I probably veer more towards the atheist side of things than your average pagan who has that sort of viewpoint, but I very definitely don't see the universe as being sort of mechanistic or completely impersonal or even completely unconscious. It's just that I'm not completely comfortable with making any assumptions about the universe. I have to say that as much as I talk about beliefs and things like that, belief doesn't really come into my spirituality a huge amount. It's more about, for me, finding ways of honouring the cosmos and finding ways of understanding it. When it comes down to it, the practice for me is the most important thing. I don't think I can ever know anything for sure, so therefore belief for me isn't really a thing. It's not, faith is not a part of my practice, it's not a part of my spirituality. I prefer to sort of acknowledge that anything may be possible, that there are things that we don't understand about the universe and things we probably will never understand, but at the same time I don't tend to assume anything based completely on faith. So my pantheism, as you might imagine, it focuses largely on the fact that everything is connected and everything is the same. That's one of the major things that I feel when I think about the divine. The divine is definitely a shaky term for me, but I've come to understand the divine to be cosmos. And when I say cosmos, I really just mean everything. I mean the universe and anything that is beyond the universe, and I feel like there probably is something beyond the universe, but of course that's complete conjecture. I wouldn't say I believe that there's anything beyond the universe, but maybe more that I feel as though there is. In the same way that I don't believe the universe or the cosmos is divine, but I feel as though it is. So I do focus on the way that everything is sort of connected, but at the same time I like also to acknowledge how everything is different and unique. I think this is something that maybe gets a little bit lost in a lot of people's pantheism, and something that they maybe don't focus on as being something particularly spiritual or particularly divine. But I actually find that to be one of the most incredible things about the divinity of cosmos. The fact that everything is connected and the same, but also simultaneously everything is completely different, completely unique. I use my pantheistic theology also to sort of try to celebrate the ungraspable fact of existence. That really is at the core of my spirituality. The very fact that anything exists at all is something that I find to be really overwhelming and hard to get to grips with. And that's one of the reasons that I feel like I want to call the universe or the cosmos divine. So my spirituality could be seen as an attempt to sort of understand existence and find my place within it. And I use pantheism as a sort of concept to try and make more sense of that, and to try and put some sort of framework on that. In my practice, I tend to address the divine as cosmos or as Gaia. Now, Gaia is a little bit of a problematic term for me. I started to use her name after reading Glenys Livingstone's Pagan cosmology, which I mention a lot in my blog, but I'll link her website down below. She actually has the entire book to read online. It's a really wonderful book, and it was actually that book that really got me going on creating an actual practice for myself that I've kept with now for over a year. Before then I'd been it took me maybe a year until I read her book, of sort of thinking about things and experimenting and that kind of thing. So a lot of my practice, it sort of stems from the practice that Glenys outlines in her book. And one of the major parts of that is her use of Gaia as a term for the divine. Now, Gaia to me is not just the earth, Gaia is the universe. And this is actually more in line with the original mythology of Gaia, the Greek mythology. Gaia is the creator of the universe. She is the original mother of the universe. She gives birth to the entire universe. So that seems very fitting to me as a mythology on which to base my practice. So as I've said before, I view the deities as archetypes. And if you don't know what that means, I'd suggest Googling it. There's an awful lot of information out there, and there's a pretty good Wikipedia article that you could have a read of. But you could say that I honour individual deities both as archetypes and as metaphors. I sort of use deity names and stories to put a more approachable face on the vastness of cosmos. So in this way I would say that I use them as metaphors. So Gaia is a metaphor for cosmos, the great creative mother. Gaia, to me, she contains light and dark, creation and destruction. The Morrigan, as I've mentioned in my blog, she is also really central to my practice, and she's becoming more and more central in the last couple of months. She focuses more on the destructive aspect of cosmos, but to me she also encompasses the whole. She encompasses both the creative and the destructive. I also honour other deities as metaphors for different forms of creation, different forms of destruction, forms of creation such as harvest, hunt, love, wildlife, that kind of thing, and forms of destruction like the underworld, death and chaos. So any sort of concepts or really basic human concepts or understandings of the world. I generally use different deities to tap into those different kinds of things. So in this way I suppose you could say that I break the divine, the unknowable divine, into more approachable or more manageable concepts. It's not entirely sort of academic or metaphorical for me though. I am starting to engage with individual deities as archetypes or as products of those archetypes. The most notable really at the moment would be the Morrigan. So when I say that I engage with individual deities, what I mean really is that I will engage in a sort of active imagination or active visualization or meditation. So during meditation, and this will be usually during ritual, I will sort of go into a meditation and I will either just allow my imagination to sort of run wild, and any figures that show up, I will try to focus on them and just see where my mind goes with it, and then I will attempt to sort of interact with that figure. I definitely see this overwhelmingly as a psychological exercise. My logical brain, at least, is seeing this completely just as myself interacting with other parts of myself in my mind and sort of attempting to get in touch with the unconscious parts of my mind and things that I don't consciously understand about myself and that kind of thing. But there definitely is some part of my understanding of this process, something in my mind kind of beyond the logical part, that really takes this sort of interaction really at face value. This is really interesting to me because I have such a skeptical attitude towards the whole process, and you know, like I said, logically I absolutely see it as a psychological process, but there definitely is something going on in my overall mind that sort of is enriched by this interaction and takes it, as I say, more on face value than I would expect. I'm still very much experimenting with this kind of thing. I think when I started out with it, I was seeing it more as a sort of self-development exercise, more than a spiritual one, but it's definitely becoming more integral to my spirituality. Quite a lot of naturalistic pagans, they don't really like to anthropomorphize. They don't like to personify deity, they don't like to personify the universe, they don't really like to bring that into their practice at all because they don't believe in it, and they don't really think that it's appropriate. But I've really never had this problem at all, and I suppose maybe it's because, like I said, I don't really have any beliefs. So whereas I don't believe that there are gods and goddesses out there looking down on us, equally I don't believe that they're not there, if you see what I mean, which is why I'm really not an atheist. I suppose you could say that I'm an atheist agnostic, in that I don't believe one way or another. I definitely veer towards saying, well, there probably isn't, but I definitely don't. I haven't like decided fully on one side or the other because I don't think we can. So for me, the more I personify, the more I engage and the more meaningful it is for me, generally speaking. I've really sort of experimented with this a lot over the past year, and I've definitely found that the trend for me is very much towards personifying and moving really from metaphors into deities. Whereas I started out with the creation and destruction aspects of cosmos as quite unpersonified concepts, I'm definitely moving more into interacting with those concepts as deities that I see representing that sort of yin and yang. So it's a very interesting process for me. I hope it wasn't too confusing, my attempt to explain all this. Like, there's definitely very blurry boundaries between kind of the concepts of archetypes and metaphors and deities to me. The archetype kind of underlies it all, and I suppose the way I interact with it, or the way I choose to use that, defines whether it is a metaphor for me or an actual deity. I suppose it largely depends on how I use it in my practice. How I integrate them into my practice. Okay, this has been a very sort of tangled topic for me to try and get into on video, probably more suited really to a blog post, but I have talked about this a fair bit on the blog, and I kind of wanted to make, I suppose, yet another introductory video to kind of get you all up to speed on where I'm at when it comes to this subject, when it comes to the divine and deities, and where I stand, and yeah, how I honour them in my practice. So I hope that was interesting, guys. I'll talk to you again soon.